2 days after my wife came home from her Vegas girls trip, the rental host filed a claim for 8 overnight guests. I had booked the house for 4 married women. The notification came through while I was standing in a conference room at work, halfway through a Tuesday morning inventory meeting. At first, I assumed Lauren and her friends had broken something. They had spent 4 nights in Las Vegas, and the place I reserved for them was a 4-bedroom rental in Henderson, far enough from the Strip to be quieter and cheaper than 4 hotel rooms. A damage claim after a weekend like that was annoying, but it was not shocking. The amount was $1,180. I opened the claim afterward. The host had listed 3 issues: additional overnight occupants, extra cleaning after a noise complaint, and damage to the patio door hardware. The reservation was for 4 adults. According to the host, 8 adults had stayed from Saturday night into Sunday morning. I read it twice. Lauren had asked me to book the house because I had used the same travel platform for years. My account had a long history, good reviews, and a few $100s in travel credit. She and Dana Kelly and Rachel had split the cost afterward. I had never thought twice about helping. Their annual girls' trip had been part of our calendar for years. For years, Lauren described it the same way. 4 women with jobs, marriages, and non-stop schedules. Finally got a weekend where nobody needed anything from them. They would eat well, drink too much, sleep late, see a show, and come home exhausted. I had always supported it. The trips had become a tradition in our marriage. Lauren would compare flights and restaurants with the other women, and sometimes ask my opinion on a hotel or rental. I never asked for more than the basic itinerary. She checked in once or twice a day, and I treated the weekend as time away that did not require supervision. The dates were never secret, and the photographs always looked like exactly what Lauren said the trips were. That was probably why the claim bothered me before I even understood it. I had put the reservation on my account, answered the host's questions, and sent Lauren the check-in instructions. If they had brought a crowd back after midnight, I was the one whose name sat on the booking. The host had attached enough exterior evidence to explain the claim. A disclosed doorbell camera and driveway camera covered the entrance, and nothing in the packet came from inside the house. The first image showed Lauren, Dana, Kelly, and Rachel walking up the front path shortly after 1 in the morning. I recognized Lauren's cream jacket and Dana's silver purse from photos they had sent earlier that night. 2 men were approaching behind them, and another image showed 2 more coming up the drive. A later time, stamped frame showed all 8 adults going through the front door. The exit images were even harder to explain away. 1 man left a little after 6, another around 6:30, and the final 2 appeared separately before 7:15. I sat back in my chair and looked at the closed conference room door. There were innocent explanations for people being in a rental house after midnight. There were fewer innocent explanations for 4 married women bringing 4 men home and then keeping them there until morning. Even that was not what made my stomach turn first. I opened my messages with Lauren. Saturday night had been ordinary. She had sent a photo of dinner around 8 and later sent a picture of the 4 women at a lounge. After midnight, early Sunday morning, she wrote at 12:54 that they were heading back to the house. At 1:27 Las Vegas time, she sent another message telling me, "Back at the house with just US girls now, going to bed soon. Love you." The entry images showed the men inside before she sent it. I checked the timestamps 3 times because I wanted the order to be wrong. The host's images were stamped in Las Vegas local time, so I converted the message time to the same time zone and checked again. After conversion, the order did not change. The men were already in the house when my wife told me it was just the girls. That changed the problem. If Lauren had come home and admitted that they had invited people back, I would still have had questions. If she had said it was a crowded after-party and nothing happened, I might have believed her or I might not have. What I was looking at now was different, because the lie had been sent while the truth was happening. I saved the claim, downloaded the images the platform allowed me to save, and made a copy of the booking confirmation. Then I took screenshots of my own messages with Lauren. I did not call her. For 10 minutes, I told myself that I was waiting because I was at work. The real reason was in the images. Lauren was not alone. All 4 women had walked into that house, knowing 4 men were following them. I thought briefly about earlier trips to Nashville, New Orleans, and Scottsdale. Nothing specific jumped out at me. Lauren had come home with the same stories about restaurants, bad sleep, crowded bars, and jokes I only half understood. Until that afternoon, none of those memories had looked suspicious. That meant I was not looking at a private mistake that Dana, Kelly, and Rachel might know nothing about. Whatever had happened, they had all been present for the part where 4 married women brought 4 men back to a house rented under my name. I thought about the other husbands. Greg Brooks was the one I knew best. Dana and Lauren had been friends since their 20s, and Greg and I had spent enough birthdays, backyard cookouts, and holiday dinners together that calling him did not feel strange. We were not close friends in the way Lauren and Dana were, but we had each other's numbers and had helped each other move furniture more than once. I waited until lunch and called him from my car. Greg answered on the second ring and asked whether something was wrong. I told him I had a strange question and asked what Dana had said around 1:30 Sunday morning, Las Vegas time. There was a pause before Greg asked why I wanted to know. I told him to check first and promised I would explain afterward. He did not like the answer, but he opened their message thread while we were still on the phone, and I could hear him scrolling. She said they were back at the house, he told me. When I asked whether Dana had added anything else, Greg read the rest aloud. We're all back. Lauren's basically asleep already. Quiet night from here. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then I told him about the rental claim. Greg's voice changed. He stopped sounding confused and started sounding careful. I sent him the host time stamped entry frame showing all 8 adults at the front door. He called me back less than a minute later and said, "There are 4 men in that picture." I told him I knew. When he asked what time the image had been taken, I gave him the timestamp, and then told him when Lauren had sent me the message saying it was just the girls. Greg went silent again. Dana's message was worse. Once we knew the timing, she had not just told Greg that everyone was safe. She had specifically put Lauren in the house, already half asleep. At roughly the same time, Lauren was telling me there were no men there. Greg asked whether I thought Dana was covering for Lauren. I told him we could not prove why she had sent the message, but we already knew she had been covering something. He swore under his breath and said he was calling Dana. I stopped him before he could hang up because one question from Greg could warn all 4 women. "If you call her right now, what does she do next?" I asked. Greg did not answer, so I did it for him. "She calls Lauren, then Kelly, then Rachel. By the time I get home, all 4 of them have the same explanation." He exhaled hard and asked what I was suggesting. I told him I did not have a full plan yet. I only knew I did not want to ask a question after they had 3 hours to agree on the answer. Greg understood the problem immediately. We decided to contact the other 2 husbands without telling them more than necessary at first. Greg knew Owen Morgan better, so we called him. I called Patrick Hayes. Patrick sounded even more confused than Greg had. Rachel was the quietest of the 4 women, and I could hear the resistance in his voice when I asked him to check the messages from late Saturday night and early Sunday morning. He found one at 1941 saying, "Everyone made it back. We're done for the night. I am exhausted." When I asked whether Rachel had mentioned guests or meeting anyone, Patrick said she had not and finally demanded to know what was going on. I told him about the claim. After a long silence, he asked to see it himself, so I sent the same exterior images and the portion of the host notice describing 8 overnight occupants. Owen called me 15 minutes later after speaking with Greg. His wife, Kelly, had sent him a message around the same time saying, "Home safe, everybody is tired. Going to sleep." The wording was different in all 4 marriages, but the purpose was the same. Every husband had been told that the night was over. Everyone was back, and there was nothing left to wonder about. Greg created a group message with the 4 of us. Nobody named it anything dramatic. It was just our first names. For the next hour, we compared only what each of us already possessed. I had the booking, the host claim, the exterior timestamps, and Lauren's messages to me. Greg brought Dana's messages, while Owen and Patrick contributed the corresponding texts from Kelly and Rachel. There was enough overlap to make the pattern obvious without touching anyone else's phone. Owen asked whether we should look through credit card statements. Greg suggested checking location histories if their wives had left them enabled. I stopped the conversation there and wrote, "I don't want us turning into 4 guys trying to break into our wives' accounts. Use what you already have access to, and if you share an account, fine. If you don't, leave it alone." Greg and Patrick agreed immediately, and Owen said the same a minute later. I was less interested in discovering every bar they had visited than I was in understanding whether the 4 messages we already had were coincidence or coordination. There was another reason not to overreach. If Lauren had cheated on me, I wanted to know exactly what she had chosen to do. I did not want her to be able to turn the conversation into one about me guessing passwords, tracking her phone, or invading accounts that were not mine. By 3 that afternoon, all 4 of us had reached the same problem. We could ask our wives separately, but the first question would warn the other 3. Dana and Lauren texted constantly. Kelly and Rachel were in the same group chats. If Greg confronted Dana at 5 and I waited until 7 to talk to Lauren, there was no chance Lauren would walk into that conversation unprepared. Patrick was the one who asked the obvious question. What if we all ask at the same time? The group went quiet for a few minutes. Then we worked out something simple. There would be no group confrontation, no meeting at one house, and no scene with 4 husbands surrounding 4 wives. At 7:30 that evening, each of us would be at home with his own wife. The conversation would begin with the same narrow fact. The rental house had been booked for 4 people, and the host had documented 8 adults staying overnight. None of us would reveal what the other husbands knew or what the other wives had already told us. We would ask our own questions first and compare answers afterward. The plan did not depend on a trick. Its only advantage was timing, and timing mattered because the women normally had instant access to one another. For years, Lauren and her friends had been able to communicate faster than any of us had reason to compare stories. Tonight, for once, they would have to answer before they knew what the others were saying. I left work on time. Lauren was already home when I arrived. She was in the kitchen cutting vegetables for dinner, talking about an argument between 2 employees at the dental office. She looked tired from the trip, but otherwise completely normal. I watched her for a few seconds from the doorway. 17 years of marriage teaches you the small details of another person's ordinary life. I knew how Lauren held a knife, how she tucked her hair behind her right ear when she was irritated, and how she opened the refrigerator twice when she had forgotten what she went there for. Nothing about her movements suggested that she believed our marriage was about to change. She asked why I was staring, and I told her it had been a long day. That was true enough. I helped finish dinner while Lauren complained about the laundry waiting upstairs and asked whether I wanted to watch a show later. As we cleared the table, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. Greg had sent a single word: ready. Owen and Patrick checked in within the next 2 minutes. At 7:24, I went into my home office and printed the first page of the host claim. I did not print every camera image. I wanted to hear what Lauren said before she knew how much I had. At 7:28, I carried the page to the dining table. Lauren looked at the page, then at me, and asked what it was. At that moment, Greg was sitting with Dana. Owen was with Kelly. Patrick was with Rachel. None of our wives knew the others were being questioned. At 7:30, 4 husbands asked 4 wives the same question before any of them had time to warn the others. Lauren looked at the first page of the host claim for several seconds before asking what it was. The house in Henderson, I said. The host says 8 adults stayed from Saturday night into Sunday morning. I booked it for 4. Her eyes moved across the page again, and she did not look frightened yet. She looked irritated instead, the way she did when a vendor at work sent a bill she believed was wrong. We had people over after we left the strip, she said. I asked who the 4 men were. Guys we met at a lounge, she said. They came back for drinks because everyone was still awake. It was just an after party, Michael. I let the explanation sit there for a moment before asking whether they stayed overnight. Not really. The host is probably exaggerating because of the noise complaint. People came over, we drank for a while, and they left. That does not mean 4 men stayed there. I had expected some kind of denial. What bothered me was how quickly hers arrived, already shaped around the narrowest version of the evidence. I turned my phone over and opened the claim. The exterior images were arranged by time. I showed her the entrance image first, then the exit images from the next morning. Lauren's expression did not collapse, it tightened. Okay, some of them stayed later than I thought. 1 left after 6, and the others left later. We were drinking. Nobody was checking the clock. I asked what she thought I was supposed to make of that. Lauren pushed the phone back toward me. You are acting like people being in the house proves something happened. There were 10 questions I could have asked. I chose the one I cared about first. Why did you tell me it was just the girls? At 7:35, my phone buzzed once on the table. I ignored it. Lauren said that by then they were already back at the house and she thought the men were leaving. I opened our message thread, turned the screen toward her, and highlighted the 1:27 message where she had told me they were back with only the girls and going to bed. She read the line without touching the phone. The men were already inside. When you sent that, I told you I thought they were going to leave. You also told me you were going to bed. I was tired, Michael. People were hanging out. You were making that message mean more than it meant. I watched her for a moment. The version had moved from no overnight guests to people staying later than expected, to 4 men being in the house while she told me there were none. I did not point out the progression because she knew what she had said. I asked what happened after she sent the message. Nothing happened with me, she answered immediately. That response came so fast that both of us seemed to hear the problem with it. I had not asked whether she slept with anyone. Lauren looked down at the table. I know what you are thinking. I am telling you I didn't do anything with anybody. My phone buzzed again, but I left it where it was. I asked whether one of the men had been in her room and whether she had kissed anyone. Lauren rubbed her forehead and called the questions ridiculous. Then said people had been moving around the house and she eventually went upstairs alone. I nodded once. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted the answer fixed in place. Then I asked, was Vegas the first trip where this happened? Lauren did not hesitate long enough to make the lie look difficult. She said yes. I narrowed it further. Was it the first time men had come back to the place they were staying? Was it the first time anything on one of these trips had crossed a line? Lauren pushed her chair back a few inches. What exactly do you think we've been doing every year? I don't know, which is why I am asking. Lauren spread her hands. We go out for dinner, we drink, and sometimes we flirt with people because we're adults on vacation. Then we come home. Vegas got stupid because too many people came back to the rental. That does not turn 4 years of trips into some secret life. She had supplied the time span without me asking. I stored it away and finally looked at my phone. Greg had written that Dana admitted Vegas was not the first trip where somebody crossed a line. A second message from him added, Dana says New Orleans matters. Ask Lauren. Owen said Kelly had admitted crossing a line once a few years earlier and had not yet explained much more. Patrick's message was shorter. Rachel says Vegas isn't the whole story. I locked the screen before Lauren could read it. She noticed and asked who I was texting, then almost immediately asked whether I had called Dana. Instead of answering, I said, what happened in New Orleans? The question stopped her. Lauren did not gasp or knock over her glass. She simply went still, then asked, who told you that? Until that second, New Orleans had been only a warning in Greg's message. Lauren's reaction turned it into something else. Tell me what happened. She stared at me before shaking her head. Dana talks too much when she is scared. I didn't say Dana told me, and your answer should not depend on which one of your friends spoke first. Lauren looked away. You didn't have to say it. I repeated the question without giving her anything else. Lauren got up from the table and walked into the kitchen. She poured herself water, took one drink, and stood with both hands against the counter. New Orleans was 2 years ago, she said. I know where it falls on the calendar. It was one night. I had too much to drink. I met someone and it got out of hand. I asked her what out of hand meant. She looked at me from across the kitchen. You know what it means. I want you to say it clearly, because every version you've given me since we sat down has gotten narrower. Lauren closed her eyes briefly before answering. I slept with someone. The sentence did not land the way I had expected. Maybe the afternoon had already prepared me for it. Or maybe the lie at 1:27 had broken the part of the evening where surprise was still useful. I asked who the man was. Lauren said she did not remember his last name. His first name might have been Matt, but she was not certain because she had never spoken to him again. That was the first clear version of what would become her main defense. There had been no contact afterward, no relationship, and no future plan. She presented the lack of continuity as if it reduced the original choice. I asked what she had told me that night. Lauren looked away and said she did not remember, but I did. New Orleans had been the year she called Sunday morning, sounding exhausted, and told me Dana had gotten sick after too much bourbon. According to Lauren, the others had spent half the night taking care of her. When I reminded her, she said Dana really had been sick too. That isn't what I am asking. Lauren lowered her eyes before answering. I know exactly what you are asking, and I know why the old story sounds different now. My phone buzzed again before either of us said more. This time I stood and carried it into the kitchen before checking. Greg had sent a longer update. Dana was admitting that New Orleans had not been the first time the group covered for someone. Nashville came first. Dana had gone off with a man, and the other 3 women had told Greg she was asleep. Then another line appeared. Dana says Lauren did it again in Scottsdale. I read it twice before walking back to the dining table. Lauren was crying quietly now, although frustration still seemed stronger than grief. I sat down across from her and asked what happened in Scottsdale. She looked up quickly enough to answer before she spoke. Who are you all talking to? I told her that her answer should not depend on who else was talking. Lauren's voice sharpened as she said, This is 4 marriages, Michael. You don't get to turn it into some group investigation just because everyone is scared. I am asking about my wife. Did you sleep with someone in Scottsdale? Lauren pressed her lips together, then finally admitted that she had. I leaned back and let the chronology settle. New Orleans, Scottsdale, and now Vegas sat in 3 different years with a separate answer behind each one. Until that night, those trips had occupied ordinary places in my memory. I remembered picking Lauren up from the airport after New Orleans, stopping for takeout after Scottsdale, and listening to stories about restaurants and delayed flights without thinking there was another version of each weekend. The discovery was not replacing one memory. It was forcing me to reopen a sequence of years I had never thought required investigation. I asked whether Scottsdale involved the same man as New Orleans, whether she knew him before the trip, whether she kept talking to him afterward, and whether she ever saw him again. She answered no to each question with more confidence than anything else she had said, all evening. Then she leaned forward and insisted that the distinction mattered. When I asked why, Lauren answered carefully. There was never anyone in my life. I never had some guy here in town, a second relationship, or somebody I was planning to leave you for. So because they were strangers, it was better. I am saying it was different. Different from having an affair with someone. Lauren nodded, as if I had finally understood her point. Exactly. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. It was the trip, she said. It ended when the trip ended. That phrase was worse than I expected, because it sounded practiced. I asked what the trip meant. Lauren explained that the 4 women treated those weekends as separate from normal life. They did not bring strangers back into their home lives or keep in touch afterward, and they avoided giving out real personal information, unless they had to. I asked how many times she had personally crossed that line. New Orleans and Scottsdale. When I asked about Vegas, Lauren repeated that she had not had sex there. The wording had changed again. I asked what did happen. She admitted that one of the men had been flirting with her at the lounge. They kissed there. He returned to the house with the group, and he spent some time in her room. She insisted that she stopped before they had sex. I reminded her that less than half an hour earlier she had denied even kissing anyone. I knew what this would turn into, she said. You mean the truth? I mean this. 4 husbands comparing every detail like we're defendants. My phone vibrated twice in quick succession. Owen said Kelly had now admitted sleeping with someone during an earlier trip and helping cover for the others afterward. Patrick's message was more important. Rachel wanted to tell him everything, and according to Patrick, she said the group had rules. I read the sentence again before looking across the table. Lauren saw enough in my face to ask what I had learned. I asked her to explain what Rachel meant by saying the group had rules. Lauren's expression changed before she answered. What exactly did Rachel tell Patrick? Rachel says the group has rules, and Patrick says she is ready to explain them. Lauren's shoulders dropped slightly, as if arguing about individual men had suddenly become much harder. It was the first time that evening she stopped arguing the individual facts and looked tired instead. They weren't rules like you are making it sound. I haven't made them sound like anything. Lauren said they were safety precautions, so I asked her to explain what that meant. Lauren said nobody was supposed to leave alone. Nobody gave strangers home addresses, and nobody got so drunk that the others lost track of her. Those rules sounded reasonable in isolation. Then I asked whether there were rules about husbands. Lauren looked toward the kitchen. Anything about what you tell us? After a long silence, she admitted that sometimes they covered for each other. I asked how long that had been happening. She said she did not know exactly when it had become a thing. The phrase bothered me because it made the pattern sound as though it had formed by weather, rather than by repeated choices. I asked whether Nashville was where it started. Lauren's eyes flicked toward me. Dana told Greg. Again, I had my answer before she gave it. Lauren said Nashville was the first time anyone crossed the line. Dana left with a man, and the other three told Greg that Dana was sleeping because they were afraid he would keep calling. I asked why none of them told Greg the truth afterward. Because Dana was our friend. So you lied to her husband to keep him from learning what she had done. Lauren hesitated before answering. We protected her from her husband finding out she slept with someone else. Lauren did not answer. And then, in New Orleans, they protected you. Her face tightened, but she could not deny it. The system was becoming visible even before I saw the missing details. One woman crossed the line, and the others learned how to cover it. The next year, someone else used the same protection. After enough repetitions, nobody needed to invent the lie from scratch. That also explained why the 4 messages from Vegas had felt so similar, without using identical words. Nobody had needed a script. Each woman already understood the assignment. Tell the husband everyone was back. Make the night sound finished, and give the others a safe place inside the story. The coordination was casual, because it had become familiar. Lauren still seemed to believe that the strangers disappearing afterward made all of it easier to forgive. I never wanted another life, she said. No matter what happened on those weekends, I always came back to this one. I was not ready to answer what she thought that proved. My phone lit up again. Patrick had sent another message to the 4 of us. Rachel is giving me the group chat. Before anyone replied, Patrick added that the conversation went back years. Until then, I knew my wife had lied to me across 3 different trips. I was about to find out that the lying had rules. Patrick did not send screenshots immediately. He called the group instead and explained that Rachel had handed him her phone voluntarily. She had told him he could read the girls' weekend thread because she was finished trying to keep 4 marriages inside one shared story. The conversation had not been deleted, and it went back through Nashville, New Orleans, Scottsdale, and Vegas. The synchronized timing had worked. Before any of the women could compare notes, Dana had given Greg New Orleans. Kelly had admitted an earlier betrayal. Rachel had stopped covering, and Lauren had committed herself to a version collapsing in front of me. Their answers could no longer be made to fit. Patrick sounded exhausted rather than triumphant. I am not dumping her whole phone into this chat. I am sending only the parts that involve us. That mattered. I wanted only the pieces that explained my marriage and the pattern Lauren had spent the evening minimizing. The first screenshot Patrick sent was from Nashville. Dana had written that Greg was calling again, and Lauren replied, "Tell him she is with us and already asleep." Rachel followed with, "Nobody needs a marriage crisis at 2 in the morning." The date matched the trip Lauren had already admitted was the beginning. Another screenshot came from New Orleans. Dana wrote, "If Michael asks, we never split up tonight," Rachel answered. "Same rule as Nashville." Kelly added that nobody should go anywhere alone. Then Lauren wrote, "I am back. Don't put anything in here I don't want to read tomorrow." I stared at Lauren's message, longer than the others. An hour earlier, she had described New Orleans as a drunken decision that simply got out of hand. Maybe meeting the man had been spontaneous, but the cover surrounding him clearly was not. Patrick then sent another set from Scottsdale. The messages were short enough to sound casual. No repeats. No real last names. Keep home separate. If somebody's husband texts, answer your own phone. Rachel had also written, "We are not losing track of anybody again." Any one of those lines could have been explained as a safety precaution. Together with the husband cover messages, they had a second purpose. The women were building a weekend that could not easily follow them back into normal life. I looked at Lauren across the table and asked what "no repeats" meant. She rubbed her palms against her jeans before admitting that nobody was supposed to see the same person twice. I asked why that needed to be a rule, and Lauren answered with almost clinical calm. Because nobody wanted complications. She explained that repeated contact created expectations. A man could find a social media account, learn a real workplace, or start believing a vacation encounter was something more. The women wanted the weekends contained. Contained was a strange word to hear in the middle of a marriage. I asked whether keep home separate included husbands. Lauren said quietly that it meant real life. We were real life. She lowered her eyes as another message arrived from Patrick. This one was from Vegas, sent at 12:58 early Sunday morning before the group returned to the Henderson rental. Dana wrote, "Say me rules tonight." Kelly followed by telling everyone to stay at the house and not wander off. Rachel warned everyone not to disappear. And then Lauren added, "Fine, and if anybody's husband checks in, we're already heading back." I read the last line twice. At 12:54, Lauren had told me they were heading back to the house. At 1:27, she told me it was just the girls. The lie had not been invented after 4 men unexpectedly ended up at the rental. She had already discussed the cover before they returned. I turned the phone toward her. "Was that before or after you kissed him?" Lauren looked at the screenshot and answered after a pause. "Before." That changed Vegas again. I asked why she had described the kiss as something that developed later, if she had already known men were coming back to the house and had already discussed what to tell husbands. I didn't know what was going to happen. "But you knew men were coming back, and you already knew what you were going to tell me." Lauren did not argue with that. I asked again about the man who had been in her room. She repeated that they had kissed, and that he had stayed upstairs with her for a while. She was still holding on to the distinction between what happened in the room and what she had already admitted. Patrick sent one more screenshot from Sunday morning. Dana had written, "Everybody alive." Kelly answered with a thumbs up, while Rachel said she was done babysitting adults. Then Lauren wrote, "Mine left, delete the room jokes before breakfast." There was no explicit description of sex in the thread. But by that point, the message did not need to spell out what Lauren had been trying not to say. I put the phone down and asked what the room jokes were about. Lauren's eyes filled again as she called them stupid. So I asked the only question that still mattered. What happened in Vegas? She said nothing for long enough that the refrigerator motor shut off behind us and the kitchen became noticeably quieter. Then she admitted it. "I slept with him." The third version of Vegas had lasted less than an hour. I asked whether she knew his name. She said Ryan, but she did not know his last name. She had not exchanged phone numbers, followed him on social media, or spoken to him since. Those answers came with the same confidence she had used for the men in New Orleans and Scottsdale. The chronology was now clear. 3 trips, 3 different men, and no continuing relationship afterward. Lauren still believed that pattern helped her. "There was never another relationship," she said. "That is what I have been trying to tell you. You keep describing the absence of a boyfriend as if it makes the lying smaller." Her expression hardened. Lauren insisted she was not calling it acceptable, only different. I looked back at the screenshots. Different would have been one bad decision followed by the truth. What you had were safety rules that also made the lying easier. Lauren shook her head and accused me of making it sound as if the 4 women had planned to cheat before every trip. I asked whether they planned which men they would meet, and she said no. Then I asked whether they planned what happened if a husband called, whether they agreed not to use real last names, and whether they agreed not to see the same man twice. She had no useful answer to any of those questions. I kept my voice level. You didn't have one affair. You built a weekend where the marriage was temporarily turned off. Lauren stared at me, as if I had deliberately chosen the harshest possible description. Lauren told me the description was unfair, so I asked which part she disputed. "We were still married," she said. "We still had rules." I almost could not believe she had chosen that sentence. I asked what those rules were actually protecting. Lauren stood and walked toward the living room before stopping in the doorway. It was 1 weekend a year. Some years nothing happened beyond flirting, and other times somebody crossed a line. Then we came home and went back to our lives. You say that like coming home erased the weekend. I am saying it was not a second life. It was part of your life that you designed me not to see. She turned around and said she had never stopped loving me. I believed that she believed it. That did not make the deception smaller. The husbands group continued to fill with updates, but I kept the focus narrow. Greg said Dana was blaming Lauren for turning New Orleans into a pattern. Owen said Kelly had admitted 1 sexual encounter in Scottsdale and several years of covering afterward. Patrick said Rachel had also crossed the line once in Scottsdale, but had not slept with anyone in Vegas. Those distinctions mattered inside their marriages, even if they did not erase the years of lying. They also destroyed Lauren's attempt to make Dana the cause of everything that followed. Dana had started the first incident in Nashville, but she had not dragged Lauren into New Orleans or Scottsdale. Nobody had forced Lauren to bring Ryan back to the rental in Henderson, and nobody had written the 127 message for her. I told the other husbands I was finished comparing details for the night. We had enough to understand the basic history, and I did not want the group to turn into a competition over whose wife had done more. Greg agreed. Patrick said Rachel wanted to leave the women's thread entirely. Owen said Kelly had muted it and was asking whether there was any way to repair their marriage. I put my phone away, and Lauren watched me closely before asking what the others were saying about her. That is not the question you should care about. I care because Dana is going to make this all my fault. You were doing the same thing to her 10 minutes ago. Lauren looked angry, then embarrassed. I reminded her that she had told me none of this would have happened if Dana had not crossed the line first. Lauren insisted that Dana had started the whole thing. She started Nashville, I said. She did not make your choices in New Orleans, Scottsdale, or Vegas. That did not end the argument, but it removed one escape route. By the next morning, the four women were already turning on one another. I knew only what the husbands told me from conversations inside their own marriages. Dana said Lauren had become more reckless over the years. Lauren told me Dana had always been the one who pushed the group toward bars where men approached them. Kelly insisted she had crossed the line only once, and spent later trips trying to keep the others from doing something worse. Rachel told Patrick she was tired of being treated like the group's designated conscience, while still lying for everyone. Their friendship had always been one of the strongest things in Lauren's life. Birthdays, family emergencies, and annual trips had reinforced the idea that these four women would protect one another. Now each woman was using a different version of that friendship to reduce her own responsibility. Their loyalty had survived ordinary pressure. It began failing as soon as protecting a friend competed with protecting a marriage. None of the husbands ordered them to stop speaking to one another. They started doing that on their own. Dana left the girls' weekend thread first, according to Greg. Lauren noticed within minutes and called it childish. Kelly stopped responding. Rachel removed herself later that morning after Patrick saved the relevant screenshots. The group had survived marriages, jobs, moves, family emergencies, and years of travel. The first cracks appeared in less than 24 hours, because secrecy had become one of the things holding it together. I still had a practical problem sitting in my travel account. Months earlier, Lauren had started talking about Miami for the following year. Nothing had been booked, but she had sent me 3 rental links and asked me to save them. I had added 2 properties to my watch list and told her we could use some of my travel credits once the dates were final. The next morning, I opened the account, removed the Miami properties from my saved list, changed the password because Lauren knew it, and deleted her saved traveler profile. From then on, any trip she booked would have to go through her own account and payment method. I was not canceling a trip because no trip existed yet, and I was not telling Lauren she was forbidden to travel. She had her own income, her own cards, and her own phone. I was simply done supplying my account, credits, booking history, and payment access to a system that had just used those things to make another weekend easier. When Lauren tried to open the travel account on the shared tablet and found herself signed out, she came into my office. "You locked me out of the travel account." I told her I had changed access to my own account. Lauren reminded me that I had always let her use it, then asked what the change meant for Miami. "You can book whatever trip you want with your own account." Lauren stared at me. "So now you are punishing me by controlling where I can go. You can go anywhere you choose, but I am not booking the trip for you or providing the reservation through my account." Lauren said that was the same thing. I told her it was not. Refusing to supply my travel account was not the same as deciding where she was allowed to go. She started to argue, then stopped because there was nowhere useful to take it. The Vegas claim was still unresolved. The platform had not made a final determination on every charge, and I told Lauren that when it did, the 4 women could divide the legitimate extra costs among themselves. I was not interested in turning $1,180 into the center of a 17-year marriage. The account mattered for another reason. For years, I had compared rentals, used travel credits, and helped make the annual weekend easier, because I trusted what it was. I was not going to keep supplying the same convenience after learning what it had supported. That version of the trip no longer existed. Lauren stood in my office doorway and asked what I planned to do next. I don't know yet. You don't know if you are leaving. I know I am not making that decision in the middle of this conversation. The relief on her face was brief but obvious, and that reaction stayed with me. Over the next 2 days, Lauren became more careful. She answered questions without as much argument, offered to stop traveling with Dana, and said the girls' weekend tradition was obviously finished anyway. She also offered to let me see her phone whenever I wanted, and suggested counseling before I had mentioned it. The offers told me she still believed the marriage could be saved if she could prove the dangerous part was over. Then, she started building a different defense around everything she believed distinguished these weekends from a conventional affair. We had 17 years of marriage. There had been no ongoing boyfriend, no hidden apartment or second phone, and no plan to leave. Above all, she kept returning to the fact that every man had disappeared when the trip ended. One evening, she stood across from me in the kitchen and said, "I always came home to you." She meant it as proof that some part of our marriage had remained protected. I heard something else. She had divided our marriage into places where it applied and places where it did not, then treated her return home as evidence that the arrangement had worked. Coming home after you turned the marriage off for a weekend isn't the defense you think it is. Lauren's face changed as the meaning of the sentence settled between us. I spent 2 days asking myself whether anger was making the decision for me. By then, anger was no longer the hardest part. The harder part was understanding that this had happened 3 times because Lauren believed those trips existed outside the ordinary rules of our marriage. I could not negotiate with a version of fidelity that disappeared when she boarded a plane. "I am talking to a divorce attorney," I said. Lauren stared at me as if that was the first consequence she had not already found a way to explain away. Talking to a divorce attorney was not the same as filing the next morning. I wanted the decision to survive the anger. For several days, Lauren and I moved around the house carefully. We slept in separate rooms, handled work, paid ordinary bills, and spoke when we had to. She kept trying to turn the question back toward Vegas, because Vegas was easier to argue about than the full pattern. All night she asked, "If this had only been Vegas, would you still leave?" I told her I did not know, and the answer surprised her. If Vegas had truly been one reckless night followed by an immediate confession, I could not say what I would have done. 17 years mattered. A marriage was larger than one evening, and I was not interested in pretending otherwise. But that was not the marriage I was looking at. There had been New Orleans, Scottsdale, and Vegas. There had been years of covering for Dana, Kelly, and Rachel. Messages designed to create false alibis. Rules that kept strangers from crossing into real life. And a Miami trip already taking shape before the latest weekend was even over. Most of all, Lauren had looked me in the face after the host claim and said Vegas was the first time. That was the answer I kept returning to, not because it was the oldest lie, but because it was the newest one. She had been given a chance to stop the pattern herself and had chosen another layer instead. I met with a divorce attorney the following week. The first meeting was ordinary. We talked about the house, retirement accounts, savings, vehicles, debts, and the practical problem of separating 17 years of shared finances. Lauren had her own career and income, and there was no question of trying to leave her with nothing. I wanted the marriage divided cleanly, not converted into a punishment system. My attorney asked whether I expected Lauren to fight over the basic numbers. I said I did not know. The marriage had taught me that Lauren could be practical when she accepted a fact, but the last week had also shown me how long she could argue with a fact before accepting it. I wanted the legal process to stay boring for exactly that reason. When I got home, I told her I was moving forward. Lauren asked whether I had already decided what would happen to the house and whether I had told the attorney about the affairs. I said the attorney knew the reason for the separation, but was interested mainly in the numbers and the documents that actually mattered to the divorce. That seemed to unsettle her more than a dramatic threat would have. There was no special courtroom punishment waiting for her. Only the ordinary division of a life she had assumed would continue. Lauren sat on the edge of the sofa and asked whether there was anything she could do to change my mind. She repeated the offers she had already made. No more girls' trips, counseling, complete access to her phone, and added that 17 years should earn her a chance to prove she could fix what she had broken. I told her those were choices she was free to make, but they could not turn 3 trips and years of coordinated lying into one bad weekend. She cried then, more openly than she had during the first confrontation. I did not enjoy watching it, but I also did not confuse her pain with a reason to erase what had happened. Remorse mattered, and so did the fact that it arrived only after the system she had relied on was no longer defensible. Over the next month, Lauren started telling a simpler version of the divorce. Her parents heard that I had become controlling after Vegas because some men came back to the rental. One of our longtime friends called me and asked whether I was really ending the marriage over an after-party. Another said Lauren felt I was punishing her by taking away access to the travel account. I could see the story she was building. Vegas had become one chaotic evening. My refusal to book Miami had become control. The years before Vegas had disappeared. I kept the screenshots off social media and did not circulate the group chat beyond the people directly involved. I also left Lauren's workplace completely out of it because her job had nothing to do with what happened. What I told Lauren was simple. I will not help you lie about why we're divorcing. She looked defensive. I am not lying. You are describing one after party and leaving out 3 years. I told my parents what I was comfortable telling them. Then tell them as much or as little as you want. But if someone asks me why I am ending my marriage, I am going to answer truthfully. That ended the idea that she could control both sides of the story. When her parents asked me directly, I kept it short. Lauren had admitted to sleeping with 3 different men on separate girls' trips. The group had covered for one another for years, and she had lied again when confronted. I gave the same limited answer to the 2 friends who asked and stopped there. I was correcting the story, not recruiting an audience. The reactions were mixed. One friend told me he understood why I was leaving. The other said marriage problems were complicated and hoped we could keep things civil. Lauren's parents were devastated and largely stayed out of the details after that. I was not looking for unanimous approval. The only thing I refused to do was carry Lauren's edited explanation for her, while she presented my decision as an overreaction. Around the same time, the Vegas rental claim was resolved. The platform approved the additional guest fee, part of the extra cleaning, and the patio door repair, bringing the final amount below the original $1,180 claim. Lauren, Dana, Kelly, and Rachel divided the legitimate charges among themselves. It was a small consequence compared with everything else, but there was something appropriate about 4 women finally paying for the 8-person night. They had initially described as just the 4 of them. The husband's group did not last much longer. Once the basic facts were clear, there was less reason to keep comparing details. Greg and I spoke occasionally. Patrick checked in once or twice. Owen sent a short update several months later. The marriages did not all end the same way, and that mattered because the 4 women had spent years treating the trips as if the same rule applied to every marriage. Greg filed for divorce from Dana. From what he told me, his decision was not based only on how long Dana had participated. Even after the truth came out, she kept changing the story depending on what she thought would save the marriage. She blamed Lauren for escalating things, then blamed Greg for comparing messages, then admitted more, only when another screenshot made denial impossible. Greg eventually reached the point where every new answer sounded temporary, and he told me there was no longer enough trust left to keep testing the next version. Owen and Kelly separated for several months. Kelly had admitted one sexual encounter during Scottsdale and years of covering afterward. She had also been one of the first to stop minimizing once Owen confronted her. They eventually chose counseling and stayed married. Owen never described it as repaired. When we spoke, he said only that they were trying, and that trust now required ordinary things to be explained, that neither of them would have thought twice about before. Patrick and Rachel took a different route again. Rachel had crossed the line once in Scottsdale, so handing over the group chat did not make her innocent. Patrick knew that, but she was also the first woman in the group to stop protecting the system once the truth started coming out. They separated for a while, and later moved back into the same house. The last time Patrick and I spoke about it, he said they were still married, but nowhere near the people they had been before Vegas. That sounded more believable to me than any clean ending. Lauren and I continued with the divorce. The house, retirement accounts, savings, and other property were divided through the normal process. She kept working. I kept working. Neither of us was ruined, and neither of us walked away unchanged. The process had cost beyond legal fees because one household became two in routines that had been automatic turned into separate bills, separate schedules, and rewritten holiday plans. People who had known us as a couple also learned to invite one of us without automatically assuming the other would come. Those were ordinary costs, but they were real ones, and both of us had to absorb them once the marriage ended. The larger collapse happened somewhere else. For a few weeks, Lauren still seemed to expect the four women to repair things once the immediate panic passed. She mentioned that Dana would calm down, that Kelly hated conflict, and that Rachel had always been the one who brought everyone back together after arguments. None of those old roles worked anymore, because every reconciliation now required deciding what could still be kept secret. The girls' weekend group disappeared. From what Lauren told me, Dana stopped speaking to her after accusing her of letting me turn everyone against each other, which was ironic because I had never spoken directly to Dana about the affair. Owen later said Kelly had reduced contact with all three women, while Patrick confirmed that Rachel stayed out of the group completely. The planned Miami weekend disappeared with the friendship. Nobody's husband had to ban it. There was simply no group left that trusted the others enough to travel together. For years, the four women had treated secrecy as proof of loyalty. Once each marriage was threatened, that loyalty changed shape. Every woman had something to lose, and each one began deciding which secrets were worth protecting. The friendship did not survive those calculations. Lauren took that harder than I expected. She had known Dana for more than 20 years. Kelly and Rachel had been part of birthdays, family gatherings, and enough annual trips that their friendship seemed permanent. The same people who had once guaranteed each other stories were now the people each woman feared would tell the next husband one more detail. Lauren complained once that Dana had betrayed her by talking. I asked whether telling Greg the truth counted as betrayal, only because the truth was inconvenient. She did not answer. A few weeks later, while we were sorting a closet before the house arrangements were finalized, Lauren found a small canvas bag printed with the words Girls' Weekend. She held it for a moment and then dropped it into a donation box. I let the bag stay in the donation box by then. We signed papers, divided the remaining accounts, and stopped sharing the little systems that had made up married life. The travel account stayed under my control. Our banking arrangements were separated, and recurring household charges were reassigned, one by one. None of those steps felt satisfying. They simply made the separation real in a way arguments never had. The final conversation that mattered happened when Lauren came by for the last box of personal things she had left in the spare bedroom. She stood near the front door and said, "I know you don't believe this, but none of those men meant anything." I had heard versions of that sentence for months. This time, I answered it. "That makes it worse in a different way." Lauren looked at me, confused, and asked how that could possibly make it worse. "You risked 17 years for people who didn't even matter enough to remember." She looked down at the box in her hands. There was no useful argument left. The men had not been secret soulmates or people she wanted to build a future with. They had been strangers selected partly because they would disappear, which had always been part of Lauren's defense. To me, that made the choice more senseless, not smaller. She and her friends had built a few days each year around the belief that consequences could be contained, and the consequences had reached far beyond those weekends. Lauren left with the box without trying to argue again. Over the following months, I did not rush into another relationship. Work stayed busy, and I started seeing my brother more often, because we had let ordinary life turn into a series of postponed plans. A little more than a year after the Vegas trip, he called and asked whether I still wanted to take the fishing trip we had talked about for years. This time, I said yes, and an old friend of ours joined us. I opened the same travel account I had used to book the Henderson house and found a small cabin near a lake several hours away. The booking page asked for the number of guests. I typed 3 and confirmed the reservation. There was no hidden meaning in the trip, no alternate story, and no person who would be edited out before anyone got home. 3 people were going, so I booked for 3. After the year I'd had, there was something almost luxurious about a number that meant exactly what it said. If you enjoy stories where betrayal finally meets consequences, subscribe for the next one. This is Blood Never Lies.